You might ask yourself, why does Ren record so many videos about INFJ humor? And if you're asking yourself that question, or you're saying this to yourself, well, you know, it's a topic that just endlessly interests me, and I think it's such a window into the soul of people and of types that I like researching it. In fact, it's funny because I don't know if you have this book yet, or if you're considering getting it, my new book on the INFJ, The Infinite Soul and INFJ Life in the Modern World. For INFJs, how can INFJs lead in this hostile world, rich, meaningful lives? You can get the book. There's a whole chapter on humor. All right? It's called Laughing with Other People. Notice the title. With other people, not on your own. It's okay to laugh on your own, but if you're only laughing on your own, you might want to consider, you know, reaching out. And you know, in this book, what I should say, right, is that the book, there's a chapter on laughter. There's another one on love, another one on spirituality, another one on minds and personas. And it usually follows this tripartite structure, like that is applied and streamlined across the various chapters, which is, it looks at these various topics from three INFJ perspectives. The perspective of the three INFJ subtypes, or INFJ's families, which is a word that in some ways I prefer. And the subtypes are, you're starting to become familiar with them, hopefully. The adaptive submissive, that's the first one. The solipsistic, which is the second one, and the third one is the liberated, or I also call it the spiritualized INFJ. And to these subtypes correspond then the three types of INFJ humor, and at least insofar as I've encountered it. And in chapter 4, particularly in chapter 4 of The Infinite, so I try to understand what's lurking beneath that in terms of, you know, the souls of these various people, and how can we link their sub-personality type to how they manifest humor. And so I want to go through them, and hopefully that will also cast light on these subtypes themselves, because that's something that I always like to do. It's something that you may not notice at first sight about my work, particularly my work as compared to other channels where they have a theoretical approach, but somehow my work is quite different. I find that a lot of channels have an approach, you know, and then some of them are really interesting, where they're kind of top down. You know, they build a theory, and then they apply their model, kind of abstract model, to the data of external reality, observing INFJs and other types, and see how the model works. Is it falsified? Is it not falsified? Does it work well? Can it predict things? You see, it's top down. You build a model and then you go down to external reality. I tend to think that I'm more empiricist, perhaps in some way. Maybe you can put it this way, but I like to start from observing things. Like, okay, people laugh in a certain way. They have a certain kind of sense of humor, or they have a certain way of manifesting feelings, or a particular experience, it seems to me, when I meet INFJs, is that they have this feeling of alienation or being severed from external reality, or they have a hazy way of interacting with people they're not very familiar with. And so I kind of build these empirical concepts that are not top down, they're bottom up. And then eventually we can try to see if a structure emerges above. It's the inverse kind of direction. And that's what I prefer, and that's very existentialist in a way, hence Jungian existentialism. So I'll apply that to humor, that because that's even prior in a way to kind of figuring out what those different types are, although I think that the laughters and the ways of being humorous really cast light. So if we look at what eventually, in my mind, became the adaptive submissive INFJ, well, I mean, what will immediately strike you is that they have a very nondescript humor, and that's completely understandable, because your sense of humor, if you are wearing it on your sleeves, it says something about you. And if you have a kind of a weird and possibly dark or absurd sense of humor, well, people will notice that, and there will be people who don't understand that and might think you're strange. Again, the whole idea of being a bit strange. Since that is like the core fear of the adaptive submissive, being singled out as strange and kind of becoming an outcast, they want to adapt so that they can conform, so that they can be included and there can be peace. They denigrate and repress, in a sense, the core source of their individuality, which is NI. So of course their humor is going to manifest as very run-of-the-mill. They'll usually adopt the humorous stance of other people. in the same way that they adapt to other people in, all sorts of ways, they also adapt to the humor. So they don't stand out, including in terms of how they laugh or what they laugh about or the jokes they like to tell or that they appreciate. If you're bland, that suits them, okay? So that's kind of all we can say. A more interesting instance then is probably the case of the solipsist, the Infj solipsist, the second stage in my Infj development, which I think, for me, what defines the humor of the solipsist, which, by the way, is often great. It's very, very funny and very entertaining. I love it. It's private jokes. The solipsist is a type, and this is something that I figured out later on. They want to kind of protect themselves. They don't want a lot of penetration from other actors, types, people. They really want to preserve their world, right? And the worldview that operates with it. They are very self-contained and they feel like they're inside a womb and they want to stay there. There's issues with that, you could argue, but at least certainly something that you can say is it manifests in a way of deploying a humor that tends to be kind of subtle, sometimes caustic, not afraid of rubbing people off, or like rubbing people the wrong way, pardon me, because taking people off because they don't mind excluding people. That's what reassures them in a way. And the private joke is a way of excluding and a way of sharing humor with other solipsists who will understand because they're also solipsists. So a lot of private jokes. If you get them, you really enjoy them. If you don't get them, you feel you don't know what's going on. Now, the last form of Infj humor is then the humor of the liberated or spiritualized Infj. And what I would argue is it's a kind of humor that is more difficult yet to appreciate because it's often directed at themselves. They like to make fun of themselves. You never quite know when they're not joking or when they're joking. It's almost like they're amused by the world. And they're amused by the world, I think, because they have really got to the end of the sort of adventure of exploring this severance I talk about between the world, which is the word they're most familiar with, that the solipsist enjoys, but they also step into the external world, maybe where the adaptive is, right? And they bridge the two, but it's difficult to bridge the two. Severance is hard to bridge, and it's constant work. The Buddhist ideal that you can achieve that in a permanent fashion, you can be skeptical of that. I think the spiritualized Infj has understood the difficulty that liberation, in a sense, is discontinuous, and you fall back into other modes of existence across the day. They've made peace with that, and they tend to make fun of that. So in a sense, they make fun of themselves. And they're amused by external reality because they know there is another world. They're also amused by that other world because they know there is external reality, and they navigate between the two. They are often strange in their humor, but they're not exclusive like the solipsist. They're more inclusive. And if you don't understand, they will be fine with that. They won't be discouraged. They'll continue practicing their humor. But so in a sense, they're happy to share with you, like the adaptive. But if you don't get it, they'll keep it instead of abandoning their viewpoint, like the adaptive, who's really, really anxious to get the acceptance. It's like they have attained real self-acceptance through their humor, and that humor is a reflection of their severance, and the fact that it never begins or ends is a sign, I think, of their acceptance that individuation and liberation for Infj is the work of a lifetime. Sounds a bit of a cliche to say, but that's what it is. So that humor is interesting. It's rare to encounter because there are just very few spiritualized Infjs in the world. But there's people who are on the way, because often we're talking about stages on the way rather than fixed categories. So pay attention, you might just see one. So if you like my channel, give me a like. Don't forget that I need reviews for The Infinite Soul, and there's been way more people getting the book and probably reading it than giving reviews. It helps with the referencing, so I would appreciate it so much if you left a review if you liked the book. Don't forget that you have the Ecstatic Soul, which is the prequel. Looks more at the structure of Infj consciousness, invented concepts like alienation, disembodiment, not quite an invention, but it has a unique approach to it, and looks at the existential constitution that arises out of Infj psychology. And I have a Patreon page that you can find the link to also in the description box. Really helps the channel going. Thank you so much to my recent supporters, and I hope more will come so that I can continue making videos. You can interact with there and so on. Okay, bye-bye guys, see ya.